Hi, I'm here with my husband, also known as Watcher Dev. Watcher Dev, what treat have you brought us today? Oh, I like treats. Have you brought someone to eat? No, Drew, it's not that kind of treat. It's Kendare Blake. Dev, can you tell us a little bit about Kendare before the interview?
Kendare wrote an amazing trilogy of Buffy-related books that deal with the next evolution of the franchise. In Every Generation, One Girl in All the World, Against the Darkness. I hope you enjoy.
Sounds tasty. Which is why we don't invite you in for the interviews. Without further ado, Kendare Blake. Yes, this is Much Ado About Something. It is.
Hi, I'm Watcher Dev. Today I'm interviewing Kendare Blake, who wrote an amazing trilogy of Buffy The Next Generation. Can you give us an overview of the trilogy?
Absolutely. So Buffy The Next Generation picks up 18-ish years after the season 7 finale, and it follows the next generation of Scoobies, which turns out to be Willow's daughter, as she is called to be the next Slayer, and also the very first Slayer witch, because she's inherited some of Willow's magiciness. After an explosion at the quarterly Slayer Fest, it leaves all of the other Slayers presumed dead, and suddenly she is called to be the next one. Buffy the Next Generation is about her being trained up to take on the mantle and also to try to solve the mystery of what happened to Buffy and the other Slayers.
Can you also describe how Frankie is born, where she comes from?
Yes. So that was a tough decision to make because it had to work with the timing of when the books were being released. So Frankie had to be a certain age. They wanted her to be about 15, 16. So Willow at that time would have had to have her, I think, just over a year after season 7. I'm like, oh, that's really close. And thinking about where Willow was as a character after that, that just seemed like a really big leap to have her like, oh, yeah, this is my time to have a child and to go through and find a donor. So we're like, well, okay, how do we get Frankie into the world? So we thought of the spell that Willow did that funneled the power of the Scythe and the power of the Slayers through herself. So it kind of resulted in another mystical pregnancy, which I know is a unlovable trope of the Buffyverse, but I mean, it is part of the Buffyverse, so that's what I went with. So that is how Frankie came to be, is she is the result of Willow's big spell that gave Slayer powers to every potential in the world.
Can you give us an overview of the other Scoobies?
Yes. So the new Scoobies are rounded out, first of all, by Jake Osborne. And Jake is Oz's much younger cousin. So if you recall in the original series, of course you do, Oz became a werewolf when his little cousin Geordie bit him after a really aggressive game of tickling. Originally, they wanted it to be Geordie that was part of the new Scoobies. But if you do the math, I had to Google like the latest that kids could get their first teeth. And it just seemed like Geordie would actually be too old to hang out with 16-year-olds at this point. So we invented a new character named Jake. And Jake was a Whoops werewolf baby that came along after Geordie had already bitten the rest of his family and turned them into werewolves as well. So you have Jake, and you also have Haley Larson, who is the younger sister of Slayer Vi Larson, who, if you remember from season 7, was played by the wonderful Felicia Day. And finally, we have a new demon. He's actually a half demon. He's a half sage demon, and his name is Sigmund DeWitt. And he is a demon kind of warrior poet, but a warrior scholars, I should say, not warrior poets. That's like Braveheart. But he embraces the scholar side. Having Spike serve as Frankie's watcher does a lot of things. Spike is very good at the training. He's very good at the snark and planning, strangely, but he's not great at the research. So having Sigmund pop in kind of fills in that Giles role. He's very bookish.
And then you also bring back Oz, and you have obviously Willow. How did the process work of you getting this? How did you get hired for this job?
Well, it was very out of the blue. I think my agent must have been whispering around town that I was a Buffy fanatic. So when this project came up, my name must have been at the top of a couple of lists because they asked me to do it and they sent me their pitch for it and their concept. Here's Frankie. She's surrounded by this group of friends. Spike's going to be her new watcher. Willow's her mom. And Oz is going to be there as well because of the Jake connection. And I was so excited because if you had asked me, okay, you can have 3 characters, but not Buffy, who would you pick? And I would have picked exactly those 3. It was kismet. I'm like, yes, I really want to do this. So that's kind of how it came about.
I really love the writing because all of the characters have aged. The characters we're familiar with. Spike is actually an adult, I think, in this book. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. As much as Spike can ever be an adult, yes, it's become an adult.
Was it always conceived as a trilogy?
Yes. Although, I thought it was one book and I got very excited because at the time I had a full slate of my own books to write. And I thought, well, I don't really have time to do this, but I can wedge in one Buffy book. I can't say no to Buffy. And then my agent said, didn't you read the proposal? It's a trilogy. You have to do 3 Buffy. So it was always a trilogy. I just didn't realize that until much later in the process. And then I was like, oh, okay.
I just interviewed William Ritter and he was wonderful, but he's dealing with a prequel. You're dealing with the future. So you had to think about the comics that were done with Georges Genti. They're not in this. They're not part of that lineage. Is that correct? It is season 7 on.
It's season 7 on. It only takes into account Buffy seasons 1 through 7 and all of the Angel seasons. So it does take into account the Angel finale as well and all of that came to pass. They wanted me to disregard the comics for the purposes of these books.
I love the Countess. Where did the idea of the Countess come from?
I was just kind of casting about for a first season big bad, someone who was akin to the Master, menacing and super fun. I love the Buffy villains. They're one of the best parts of the show. Every single villain is so strong. I definitely wanted somebody there who was going to have charisma, but also who had enough weight so it felt like a believable big bad. This isn't just a monster of the week. This is somebody that she can't just do away with over the course of 43 minutes. This is going to take some planning. And I've always been intrigued by the legend of Elizabeth Bathory. So the Countess was born, and she ended up being a cross between Glory, but older, and some of that whole Master sensibility. I think she had a lot in common with the Master as well.
Yeah, she's terrifying. And I love the fact that she doesn't have the typical vampire eyes, does she? She has different color eyes. Can you talk about that?
That's her secret, is that she has been drinking virgin blood all of this time. So it gives her the strange red eyes and also a nice side dish of special powers to go with that.
I love it. I would love to see that as an episode. Because it's a very hard thing to do, is to take something from history and kind of, like you said, it's her own little genre and bring her into the Buffyverse. Did you find it hard to write her, or did she come to you pretty easily?
She walked onto the page with such a larger-than-life personality, and she had so many quirks that just were immediately apparent. I love that she surrounded herself with just beefcake henchmen, and that she had a lot of the old Dracula lore, like she traveled with her own soil from her homeland, and that was really fun. So she was surprisingly easy because villains often have some of the best lines. They're just grandiose by nature, and that's always really fun to write.
Did you have a person in mind for her? If you were going to cast her, was there anyone you thought would be her?
I imagine a woman who's just very composed and wears fantastic pantsuits. I have no idea. I'm the worst at that game when people ask me to cast my books.
When you went, did you pitch, was it always going to be the Countess and then we were going to move on to the other villains? Was it always that structure?
No, that was kind of my invention because I felt like the darkness becomes the big bad of the whole series. But that's a level up for little Frankie. When she's first starting out, she's very much Baby Slayer. And I felt like she just needed a training wheels villain to get her bearings and to really acclimate to being a Slayer before she could face something as complicated as the darkness. The darkness was what was pitched to me as that's going to be the big bad. And I'm like, okay, but we need something else to start with. So then I came up with the Countess.
Can you talk about the overall conception of it being like a mini season? Because it did feel like a season. Each book feels like a season of the show.
I'm so glad to hear that, because when I approached this, it was scary to consider, like, how do I distill a 22 episode season of Buffy into a book? How do I make it still feel like as if we're watching some lost episodes of Buffy, but in book form? And I thought, well, I just have to kind of follow the format. I have to follow the format of the TV season. I've got to have the premiere episode. I've got to have some monsters of the week in there. I need to have training montages. I need to have a big bad, like one per season. And it all has to just follow that arc. And then each book will kind of function like a mini little truncated season. And by the time we get to the end of the third book, you'll feel like you've watched the entire series of Frankie the Vampire Slayer. I really wanted to try to make the books feel as much like TV as I could, which was actually quite difficult. It takes a lot of words to get fight scenes. Each of these books is actually about 100,000 words long, which is really kind of long for a young adult novel. By the time we got to the third book, I had to cut my monster of the week entirely because there was just no space. It was just wall to the wall, jam-packed with the final season.
You know what's actually really funny? It broke my heart at the end. I wanted it to carry on. I hope you get to do another trilogy. I hope they hire you to do another trilogy, because it's definitely there. You've definitely got somewhere for those characters to go.
Oh, thank you. I love Frankie and the new Scoobies. It's really been nice to see some of the readers and some of the Buffy fans seem to really connect with them. Somebody said they feel like the next generation. I can really imagine that these kids were raised by the OG Scoobies, and that's the best compliment to hear, because that's what I was trying to do.
How did you come up with the idea of Frankie?
Frankie was the idea that was given to me. Her name was always Frankie Rosenberg. She was always Willow's daughter. In the pitch, she was described as the first ever Slayer witch. But it was my job then to put her in the flesh, so to speak. So I started imagining what a child like this might be like, what Willow's daughter might be like. She's going to have red hair and she's going to be pretty cute, and also kind of have that Willow sensibility. I love when Willow used to get her stern face on when she sensed that justice needed to be done, and her little forehead would wrinkle. So I wanted to give Frankie a little bit of that, but also some of that Slayer confidence that comes in later. I had to imagine that growing up as a person who knew, she wasn't just a regular Sunnydale resident. She grew up knowing about vampires and demons and slayers. And she grew up in the shadow of not just a witch and a slayer, but the greatest witch and the greatest slayer to ever walk the face of the earth. So for this girl who is really good at telekinesis, but not so great at other magic, and her mom is the greatest at everything, and now she's called as a slayer, and it turns out she's kind of a klutz at it. But of course she would be, because she's all up in her own head, because she watched Buffy do it, and Buffy made it look easy. She has the two biggest shadows falling over her at all times. So that made her a really interesting character to me. It was fun watching her find her own way out of those two shadows.
I really love that. And that's so human, isn't it? We all feel that. We all feel in awe of someone. We're like, that person's so much better than I am. I love that. I love that so much. Does Disney Hyperion come up with concepts and then they send it to you and you're like, that's what you've got to work with, but you can do what you want within that framework?
That's how it worked for me. I can't speak to how it was for Will or Lily. They came to me with, I think it was like a 3-page treatment of the first book and then a couple paragraphs for the next books to give me a feel of what they wanted to do and like the tone of it. But then they just let me run wild. And I'm pretty sure, I haven't looked at that treatment since we signed the contract and I started writing it. So I'm fairly certain that the paragraphs for book 2 and 3 just went completely out the window, because by the time I'd built everything in every generation, we were on a trajectory and that was just the way it was going to go. So they did let me have free reign. It wasn't just fleshing something out, which I don't think I could have done. It was, here's some characters. You have carte blanche to figure out what these characters are like as people, how their dynamic is together. who they are, what they look like, even to a certain extent, as far as the new Scoobies were concerned. I didn't know what a sage demon was. I just knew it was called a sage demon. So I got to decide what kind of a character Sigmund was going to be. So that was a lot of fun. And since nobody at that time at Disney was working in the Buffyverse in the future, Will's book, Bloody Fool for Love, like you mentioned, was a prequel. And Lily's, at the time, Big Bad, was alt universe. So I kind of had freedom to just do whatever because I wasn't going to be interfering with anybody else's storylines or timelines. There was not going to be any conflict. I wrote an entire draft, actually, without Xander in it because Xander was not mentioned in the original pitch treatment. So I didn't think I had authorization to use him until my editor said, don't you think maybe Xander should call or be involved in this somehow? I'm like, okay, so I can. And that kind of gave me the freedom to then bring in other people. And that started bringing in other people until they said no, which they never did.
I really love also that the weight that Frankie is carrying is the weight of everybody, because there are no Slayers really at this point. She is basically, you've gone back to Buffy season 1. What episodes did you watch to prep for this?
Well, joy of joys, my best friend had never seen a single episode of Buffy. This was my pandemic book. I wrote in Every Generation during the pandemic part of the lockdowns. So I was like, you know what? We're going to bubble up and we're going to watch every single Buffy episode, and it's going to be great and it's going to be research, but mostly it's an excuse to force Buffy onto you because how have you lived this long without seeing a single episode? So I rewatched all of them, but I've seen Buffy so many times over the years just in rewatches that it kind of lives in my head, constantly streaming in the background. So I would be writing and I would write in a subconscious Easter egg. And then I would get to the episode during the rewatch and I'd be like, I already wrote that in. I didn't even know I remembered that, but that's totally an Easter egg from this episode. In like the first 5 chapters of In Every Generation, I mention the movie The Journey of Natty Gann. And the lead actress from The Journey of Natty Gann plays the teacher in I Only Have Eyes for You, the one where...
Oh, yeah. I love that episode.
And we got to that episode and I'm like, that's Natty Gann. I'm like, I just put that in the book like last week.
That's awesome. That's an awesome Easter egg. We're actually going to do a competition. We're going to have a competition for the ultimate Buffy fan. I might use that as a question.
I was terrified of getting things wrong because I know Buffy fans, like I'm one of them. So I felt like I had the street cred that I could really do that. But every once in a while, like I would double, triple check myself.
In starting the rewatch and sort of analyzing the show more, I've been sitting watching Juliet watch them and taking notes and stuff. They're so well written. And how intimidating is it? You watch that show, even episode 1, there's great line, story point that's hits. It's unbelievable.
I think Buffy the Vampire Slayer was lightning in a bottle. It was the perfect cast. They had the perfect chemistry. They had the best writers, the greatest concept. Every time I watch an episode, I'm blown away by the writing. I'm blown away by the acting. I really don't know what I love more. It all just came together so seamlessly, and it feels like magic. I'm old enough now that I've seen some really bad TV. Now when I look back at Buffy 25 years later, or how many years it has been, it still holds up. This is still one of the best things playing on that TV. So yes, it was very intimidating. As luck would have it, since I did watch Buffy during my formative years, that sense of humor is kind of my sense of humor. I was surprised at how easy it was to fall into that Buffy speak. It kind of comes naturally.
It is crazy, like you say Big Bad or Sitch. It just is part of your language.
Yeah.
How powerful is Frankie as a character? How strong is she? Because she's a witch as well.
She is a witch as well. And her telekinesis can do a fair bit of damage if she really puts her mind to it. That was something that I really had to balance. Because if you think about it, that season 6 finale, when Willow's all juiced up on the black magic, I mean, she is strong. So magic, I mean, she gave Buffy a run for her money. Xander had to hug it out of her at the end because Buffy couldn't get it done. So the magic that runs through her on Willow's side is strong, but the Slayer line is extremely strong. I don't know actually if there was ever just like a slay off, if they all just lined up against and did the punch machine where they measured like the strength of the hits, I don't know where Frankie would fall. Actually, I have to imagine that she would fall on the lower end of the spectrum. Like, she's probably not as physically tough as Buffy and Faith, but she has her own style and she learns to blend the magic with the physical slaying. So, she gets the job done, and that's what Slayers do.
What I love that you created with her is her vulnerabilities in herself. Like, it's her own self-doubt. She's super relatable. You're a hero, but you're still an insecure human being. I love that you gave her that. Was that part of you as well? Is that part of you, that character?
Well, I feel like it was part of Buffy, because even though Buffy, Sarah Michelle Gellar, obviously a beautiful actress, obviously very charismatic, and when she slays, you're looking at her and you're like, this woman can save the world. I believe it. But when she's walking around the halls at school, or sometimes you're like, this woman is awkward, and I believe it. So Sarah Michelle Gellar and the writers imbued Buffy with some of that tendency. Just because she's the greatest superhero ever doesn't mean she doesn't also have nightmares at school. So that felt like very much a part of the Buffyverse to me, is having these kids go through regular teenage travails that were only heightened and reflected back in the demons that they had to face. I mean, even if some people don't want to admit it, I think that's kind of all of us when we're growing up. We have those awkward moments and that self-doubt. Superman, not relatable. Clark Kent, relatable. So you really need to have that duality in a character like this.
Can you talk about One Girl in All the World?
Okay, so One Girl in All the World, that is book 2. It's kind of like Frankie the Vampire Slayer season 2. Frankie has accepted the Slayer mantle. Now, the overarching question of what happened to Buffy and the others needs to be answered. So things are heating up as far as the mystery goes. At the end of book 1, we got some hints that maybe the Slayers that we thought had perished were not so perished. And so that's where book 2 picks up, is how do we find Buffy? Is Buffy alive? Did more Slayers survive? Who survived? It's so hard to do without spoilers. But if some survived, then did the rest survive?
I mean, maybe you could spoil it a tiny bit, just a tiny bit. She confronts sort of really an ultimate power in that book.
Yeah. It was fun to get into some Slayer versus Slayer. I think that some of the most electric scenes in Buffy were when she and Faith would face off, and you're seeing 2 different sides of the Slayer coin and 2 different interpretations of what the Slayer power meant. So I was very excited to have more Slayers on the page and to have Frankie deal with that head on. What that legacy meant, what the spell that Willow and Buffy did, what that meant for the people who weren't immediately involved in the battle and didn't really say, yeah, okay, this sounds great. I want the superpowers too. That little girl who just suddenly smashed the baseball out of the park. Like, how did that affect her life going forward when she had no idea what was happening? So the last 2 books made that really an interesting question to ponder.
And you bring back the swim team. Can you talk about that? That must have been super fun to do that.
When I got the idea for Monsters of the Week for book 2, I was just like, you know what? I want to bring back the old classics. How do I do that? So I conspired to bring back as many Buffy fan favorite villains, even just for a cameo, as I possibly could. And I don't really remember why I settled on the Sunnydale 1997 swim team as being the biggest monster of the week that had the most page time. They just seemed to fit. For some reason, their story was most able to integrate with Frankie's day-to-day high school life. If they were, breaking into the pool and returned from the sea for some nefarious purpose. So that was really fun. I tried to make sure that I brought a familiar demon back from every single season of the show. So at one point, there's a chapter called A Demon for All Seasons, because there's literally a demon plucked from every season of Buffy that makes a small page appearance. It was so fun.
Who did you bring back?
One of the mantis types from Teacher's Pet. Obviously not her because she perished, but another mantis type. You see a Fjarl demon, which Giles turned into in season 4 in A New Man, and I love that episode. I think it's hilarious. I brought back some Polgara demons. The gentlemen are there very briefly, and that was really fun as well, although they did create kind of a logistical problem with like, are they going to take everybody's voices again? This is going to be an issue. We have to get them out of here before they manage to do that. Who else did I bring? I think I didn't actually say who he is, but one of the demons that conjured the images of the little children who weren't really murdered, that guy, I brought him back. There are the telepathic demons in earshot make an appearance. I kind of went wild. Eventually I get like the spider demons from season 7 that Anya, when she's a vengeance demon, she calls down on that frat house. I get them. Yeah, so it was a lot of fun.
Do they have anything off limits to you, or can you use anything from the Buffyverse?
I never got any pushback. At one point, my editor said, "Do you think you have too many Andrew jokes in here?" And I'm like, no, I don't think so. I don't think there can ever be too many Andrew jokes. So no, I was never told that I couldn't use something. And when I kind of got the feeling about that, I just went wild. Just when I thought I couldn't do another reference to the show, I'd find like 12 more. So every single book is loaded.
Talk about the darkness a little bit if you can.
So the darkness is, I mean, they're the big bads. And it's impossible to talk about them without like spoiling them, but they're rogue slayers who disagreed with the spell that made them into slayers. And now they would like to turn in their slayer cards. They're at odds with Frankie because of it. So that's a big conflict. And when you're dealing with slayer versus slayer, it's so much more complicated because they're an equal power match. So what do? A slayer is a huge threat to another slayer. Probably maybe the biggest threat that they can imagine facing is one of their own.
You know what I also really loved in that as well is what things, it's so hard because I want to spoil it, but things appear a certain way and people are making certain stances and saying certain things, but that isn't really what's going on. You actually get into much deeper psychological, issues of narcissism, megalomania, and all-consuming power and the corruption of that power. I love that you created that. What you achieve in Frankie that I really like is she carries the weight of a slayer. The darkness is another type of idea. What they're really trying to achieve is much more nefarious and dark, I think.
Yes. Oh, yes. But I wanted to craft that charismatic leader, and I wanted her to have a pretty good sales pitch. Because, every maniacal leader, if you listen to them speak, their sales pitch can be kind of seductive. So I wanted her to have a point. It's not that she doesn't make some good points. It's just that she goes about it all wrong. Once you cross certain lines, it doesn't matter how right you are anymore. You're now wrong. So it was a fun balance to strike. And yes, having this be so much duplicity, I think I actually have at the end of book 2, I have a flash forward where you see something happen and then I have a flash back explaining what maybe really happened. And when I went to write that, I'm like, I don't even know if this is going to work in book form. I can imagine how it would play out if we were on screen, but I'm writing this in words. So is anybody going to understand what I'm doing? But actually, it ended up being one of my favorite parts of that book.
I don't know if you know, but Juliet wrote a bunch of blurbs for the book.
Yes. My editor sent them to me with just like all caps subject line, Juliet Land. Oh. And it was so amazing. I can't believe she took the time. So wonderful.
Juliet wants to say hello, if that's okay.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Juliet?
Hey, I'm off camera, but I wanted to say hi to you. How are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to read Buffy The Next Generation and to do those beautiful write-ups. They literally made my year. When I saw the email come in from my editor, at first I couldn't even open it because I'm like, I don't know. I imagine that it's really nice, but I almost don't want to know. And it was so lovely. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, your trilogy is wonderful. And I'm so excited that you're doing this and being on our podcast. Maybe you'll write another book with Drusilla in it. I'd love to see what you would do with her voice. The Countess is so beautifully delineated. But just as long as you don't kill Drew.
No, I don't think I was actually authorized to kill anybody major. Oh, except for Faith. They made me kill Faith. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
What are you working on right now?
I have a fantasy book coming out in September I'm just wrapping that up now.
Woohoo! Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. It's so lovely to get to speak with you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say bye. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you. It was great to chat with you for a minute.
Yeah. Talk about how you explore Spike in this book and his relationship to missing Buffy.
Yes. Spike is one of those characters that he turned out to be the easiest character to write. And that is thanks to how dynamic they made the character throughout the show and the performance of James Marsters. Essentially, it allowed me to write him in any way. Spike can be a buffoon one second, and he can be a narcissist the next, and he can be surprisingly insightful in the very next scene. And James Marsters played it so nimbly, and the writers wrote it so nimbly that anything I needed Spike to do, I could make him do. And it was all in character because Spike can do anything as long as he's quintessentially got the Spike swagger. His personality is so large that I think it translates well for any writer. I think you give him that well delineated a personality and we can all bring it to the page. So it was fun to see him in a different medium take on that role as Watcher and kind of surrogate father figure that he was totally unprepared to do, even though he's been a Watcher. And, I imagine he's trained quite a few of the Slayers that have come before, but Frankie was different because he'd known her since she was a little kid. And then all of a sudden, he's back in Sunnydale full time. And I think that is what put Buffy even more in his mind. He thinks he just lost her forever. Everybody thinks Buffy is dead, and they're in mourning at the same time as they scramble to get Frankie up to speed so that the world is not left without a Hellmouth protector. And then when it turns out that Buffy might not be, well, that's a whole other thing for Spike to process. Because, yeah, they both moved on. They both had lives in the interim. But Spike had, well, let's face it, a Buffy obsession. And it's not gone, at least in my books. She is still number one bullet point on Spike's lists are top of mind. And that provided a good bit of motivation for him to stick around, for him to see it through to the end. And I really loved watching his character evolve over the course of this trilogy and relate to the other characters. I loved it whenever I could get the OG Scoobies, Willow, Spike, and Oz just in a room alone together. That's my favorite. I just want to hear them talk about old war stories and see how they relate to each other now. It was the most fun.
So when you were writing this, do you walk around the house or walk around the streets talking in the character? Do you think about the character? Do you talk in the character's voice to yourself?
Every once in a while, I kind of see a flash forward scene play out in my head. Because I can picture the actors and the characters playing it out as if it is a scene from the show. So every once in a while, I just hear maybe Spike and Willow have an exchange, and I would think, oh, I'm so excited to write that part. I'm so excited to write that scene when we get to it. I'm what's known in the industry as a pantser, so I tend not to plot my books beforehand. I tend not to outline things. I kind of just dive in and see where it leads. So it was very much, I know where this season is supposed to arc out to, and then I'm just going to sit down and write until we get there. So I had a lot of fun scenes that some of them ended up getting cut. I'd have scenes that I need to write in and add later. Every scene that I'm writing, I'm seeing it like an episode in my head, which is really fun.
So if you get blocked, if you get to a scene and you're like, I can't, can you go forward into other scenes, or do you have to stay in that scene until you figured out the problem?
Knock on many, many pieces of wood. I've never actually been blocked before. I will kind of have a natural, okay, I kind of know what happens in this scene, and then the next scene, and then the next scene. And then if it's foggy, I just stop. I don't feel like it's being blocked. I just feel like, well, that one's not here yet, so I'll give it a day or two, and it'll show up, and it always does. So I write to what I've got, and then I stop, and then my subconscious starts to fill it in, and I'm ready to go for the next writing session.
Can you talk about Aspen and where she came from? Because she's a fascinating character.
Yes. So Aspen is revealed to be the leader of the darkness. So the leader of the rogue faction of Slayers that is standing essentially between Buffy and Frankie. They're kind of holding Buffy and the others at ransom until they're allowed to give back their Slayer powers. And give back, I say, in air quotes, because they may be up to something else. I don't know if you have ever watched the show Schitt's Creek.
Yes.
But there is an episode of Schitt's Creek where a girl from Alexis's past shows up in Schitt's Creek and is the most New York, California obnoxious girl you've ever seen. And she's got like this great hat and this great fashion. And she's just like, oh my God, girl. But also she kind of carries herself like a boss. Everybody around her kind of just falls in line. There's a good portion of that girl in Aspen. I wanted her to be that girl who is a little bit mean, but also extremely glamorous so that other people kind of just naturally want to follow and listen to what they say. And have that charisma where, okay, even if some of this stuff that she's saying sounds a little bit wrong, you kind of brush it off because she's saying it with such conviction. Yeah, I really just wanted her to be a foil for Frankie because she is all about the power and she's a much more dangerous slayer. She's very much by the book. She's been trained very well. I mean, Spike's trained her. She's a very good counterpoint and strong enough to be a real threat.
Yeah, she is. And what's interesting is that there are moments when you agree with her.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what's really scary, is that she is seductive. That's what's really great, is that there's a moment where you're kind of like, whoa, she does have a point,
Yeah.
which I guess is the danger of all power.
She's not all wrong. And she has suffered losses. She lost someone who was very close to her, and that kind of what pushed her down the route that she goes. I didn't want her to completely be inhuman because she's not. In a similar way that Faith was troubled, but you see her vulnerabilities and you can see she's got a heart, her arc of redemption. I wanted Aspen to have that side of humanity. There's a little bit of interplay with Frankie's main love interest happens to be Aspen's also main love interest. So there's some of that push and pull, and that let Frankie see another mirror of a slayer, like, oh my gosh, she's so much more beautiful. She's so much cooler. She's older. And why does he like me when he used to be with her? It also sets up some moments for the other Scoobies to doubt Frankie's motivations. Do you think maybe you're just going after Aspen this hard because, I don't know, she's his ex-girlfriend? She's like, no, for serious. And like nobody kind of believes her.
Oh, can you also talk about her having a love interest? And you create the perfect Buffy thing, which is a triangle relationship. If you look at the show, there's so many times where this one's in love with this one's not in love with this one. That must have been so much fun. But can you talk about Frankie's love interest?
Yeah. Frankie's love interest, he was part of the pitch. So Grimlock, the demon who might eat Slayer hearts, was part of Disney's pitch treatment. And I just basically went full angel with him. He's kind of a millennia old demon, and he's extremely attractive. In the Buffyverse, that's tradition to have a really old demon fall in love with this girl who's fighting for justice. And now, through a modern lens, we kind of look at that and go, maybe less of that, because that's weird. But when you're a teenage girl, I mean, he looks like he's maybe 20. So still, it's tough. And I did try to address that as the books go on. It very much starts out as an infatuation, you know, he's got the salty goodness going on. And then their relationship deepens and they become allies and they learn to trust each other. There's some betrayal thrown in. Of course, the love triangle angle that you mentioned. And I hope that it ended up at a decent place.
Oh, it did. It's amazing. Can you give us an overview of Against the Darkness?
So Against the Darkness, I mean, that's season finale territory all the way. It was big. I was so excited to write it because I knew that I was going to get to bring certain characters back that I'd been waiting to bring back the whole time. It picks up where Frankie has just played a major gambit at the end of book 2. So we've got a little double agenting going on with the Scoobies. Haley, Vi Larson's little sister, is now pretending to play for the other side. But is she really pretending, or is she actually being seduced by the other side? In every Buffy season, you build up the Scoobies and you come to love their relationships together, and then you fracture them and you have the Scoobies start to pull away from each other. And that, as a viewer, you're like, no, stop, you're best friends. Why are you behaving this way? We need you to come back and be best friends again. So a lot of the arc of the third book is, can the Scoobies stick together through these extremely trying stresses? And in the background, we also have a little bit of the rise of Dark Willow going on, which was a lot of fun.
Can you talk about how you approach magic as addiction?
Yes. Well, within the Buffyverse, magic has been used as a metaphor for lots of things. Self-discovery, empowerment, lesbianism and same-sex relationships, and all those positive things, but it was also used as a metaphor for addiction in season 6. And so that's what I treated it as in every generation, because I thought that's probably the one that rocked Willow's world the most. So in her mind, magic is like a drug, and she's afraid of it. She respects it. She's getting drawn back into the world of it because they want her to use it for good. But as a person, if you don't struggle with addiction yourself, I don't know if you can ever really understand how difficult that is to ask somebody to dip a toe in and just leave your toe in there and you'll be fine. Just don't go all the way in. Like, it's so simple. So I wanted her to struggle with that you're never really cured. You're always struggling against it. It's an ongoing battle. And even if she slips, it doesn't mean she's blown it. She's not redeemable anymore. It's human. You slip, you get back up, you get back on the wagon, you try again. So that's what I really wanted to have her dark magic journey be about for these books.
As a reader, I really got to see it from Frankie's point of view of how scary that would be to have your mother going back to something that you never knew about, but maybe had hints of was in her life. I love the way you did that. That was brilliant.
Thank you. Yeah, because she's heard about this Dark Willow, this world ender. Everybody calls her mom, the world ender, the Red Witch. But she's never seen it because Willow's always had herself under control and very much tamped down for her entire life. So for her to get a glimpse of that, it's like, yeah.
And it also becomes that thing where you've taken the stakes to a level with Aspen and then you take it to another level because everything that's behind her that supports her, I mean, it's really unstable. Everyone's going through something in that book, aren't they? All your Scoobies are going through something. Even Spike is going, like, they're all a little off kilter. Was that a deliberate choice to make it more intense, to make that final battle more intense?
It was, because I wanted that final battle to be, I was very much reminded of season 4, which was such a growing pains season for the Scoobies. That first transition into college life, and what worked in high school for friends doesn't necessarily work in college for friends. And Frankie just has like, okay, now I've found my Scoobies and we're all really close. But wait, maybe not. All these life forces are conspiring to maybe pull us apart. And will we be able to keep it together? So I wanted that final battle to come at a point where they're like, oh my God, yeah, now we're going to unite and we're going to make that super Buffy like they did at the end of season 4. And I really loved that moment. And I wanted the new generation of Scoobies to have like a similar moment. Everybody is pulled in different directions in the last book, which makes it challenging to write from a character standpoint. But, it needed to happen. You didn't even ask about this, but I'm going to mention it. I loved writing Frankie and Haley together. They're like,
oh, I love them.
Girl friendship. Because I loved whenever Buffy and Willow would kind of get together and just do girl things that didn't really have anything to do with slaying and just talk about boys or talk about school or talk about the future. I love those moments. I think they had such a great friendship. And I wanted Frankie and Haley to have that too.
Well, also, she becomes strong in her own way, Haley. She seems equal to Frankie, to me, as a character. Would you say that?
Yeah. And she's got her own choice to make. In Against the Darkness, I'm confronting the idea of choice and consent. And these people made a choice, and these people had no choice. And what does that mean? And how do people react to it? And then this is going to sound really vague and spoilery to the people that have not read the book, but then I give Haley that very same choice.
I love that.
And she goes another way. Haley really has a journey here because what she thinks she wants, what she thought she wanted her entire life, was to be a slayer like her big sister Vi. And to watch Frankie then come into those powers and still become a good friend to her and a support system, even though she's kind of like the Xander of the group. She doesn't have any magical powers of her own. And then when she finally has the opportunity to, she's enough in herself by that point. She's come a long way. And I love her. She was one of my favorite characters.
And she's such a cool character. As a character, she's cool in herself, right? That's what you're talking about. Like, She's someone you want to be as a character.
Oh, yeah. I think Frankie really looked up to her the entire series. She's so much cooler than Frankie at every turn.
Wrapping up a trilogy is a very bittersweet thing to do. It reminded me part of my own youth of letting go of things and growing. Can you talk about that? And how was that for you to write and you to also go through as a writer?
It was joyous because I got to do this thing in the Buffyverse. And if you had told 16-year-old me that I would ever be writing official books in the Buffyverse, I would have passed out cold. So on the one hand, there is all this joy because the books were an absolute joy to write. I've never had more fun writing in my whole life. They didn't feel like work every time I sat down at the computer, even during revisions, which I normally hate. I was just excited because I got to do it again. I got to write more Buffy. I got to put in extra scenes. Even the scenes that I lost, I'm like, well, I enjoyed writing them the first time, so they can go, and I'm going to write new scenes that I love even more. But it was bittersweet because all endings are sad. I don't even believe in happy endings. I think by the nature of things ending, you're always bittersweet. That's the best you can hope for. If you love something, you're going to be a little sad when it's over, no matter if everybody ends with a smile on their face. So it was painful knowing that my time in the Buffyverse was coming to an end. When you're writing books, at least, I'm sure maybe it's the same for actors. When I'm done doing my work, the book won't come out for like another year. So I at least have the book release to look forward to because then there will be a time when I get to talk Buffy one more time with fans and just really geek out over it. I was really looking forward to that. And it has been nice to hear from the readers of the trilogy and to hear them say like, oh, I was so excited when you brought this person back in, or, oh, the ending felt like such an epic season finale. So that was really nice. But I'm still sad. They really had to drag me out of the Buffyverse just kicking and screaming.
Did you learn anything about yourself writing these? Because the books seemed very, weirdly, I felt they were quite personal in a way.
Oh, I haven't heard that feedback before, and that's really wonderful because if I learned anything, I learned that there's way more Buffy floating around in my head than I ever imagined because they did feel effortless. It felt like those books and the world of New Sunnydale was kind of just sitting in my head waiting for the chance to come out of there. So that's what I learned about myself.
I had a judgment going in. I sort of judged young adult, but these are not really young adult. They're great books. What's your approach to writing young adult, writing a book for more adult audiences?
Well, I think a lot of people have that idea that if you write for young adults, it's going to be silly or it's going to be not as complex. Maybe the characterization is shallow. And I can tell you firsthand, if you want to write a good young adult book, a young adult book that's going to resonate with actual young people, you can't do that. You can't condescend to the material. Kids are smart. You treat them like adults. They want to be treated like adults. They want their entertainment to be treated with respect and done well. They can identify crap from a mile away. They can identify if you're not being genuine. They've got radar for that. The only reason I write for young adults is the stories that seem to come to me tend to be geared towards that age group. I don't dumb anything down. I don't make it less complex. I don't shield anything. If there are swear words in that world, there are swear words. If there's violence, there's violence. It's just a category. We have to have a way of, where do we put this on a shelf? Bookstores need that. They have to have organization. But within young adult, you can find pretty much everything. Just like within adult writing, you can find genre pieces, you can find literary pieces. So that's how I approach it.
The thing that also jumped out to me was it really reminded me there are great other shows within the genre, especially Juliet and I making a vampire documentary series. But Buffy works because it has that restraint that you can have to watch it with your family. If genre is about dealing with things you can't deal with in just a straightforward conversation, making it for an all ages audience is even more of that. You have to be much cleverer with your metaphors. And I think that's what you achieved. The idea of the Countess is interesting because she's a domineering, older, glamorous woman who's really evil, right? That's a relatable character that one meets in one's life. It's wonderful. You can talk about that. I think young people have those experiences. We all have those experiences. I mean, well, maybe just talk about the idea of genre and how you use genre to express difficult ideas.
That was one of the things that I loved most about Buffy. They used demons as a metaphor for growing up and the teenage experience. They had Buffy go through it, but even though she was a vampire slayer and she had to face multiple apocalypses, she felt very relatable because many things when you're that age feels like you're facing down an apocalypse. Like the world may actually end if you don't do this thing correctly that you've been working towards for your entire life. Like if you don't get your adolescence correctly, it could feel like the world may end. They did that in such a smart way. You ever watch something that you loved as a kid and you go back and watch it as an adult and you're like, oh, this was for kids. This was not what I remember it as. Buffy isn't like that. It's just good. It's so well done. And the things that stay and that you're obsessed with as a young adult and you remain obsessed with as an adult are the things that are really well made and really well done. I tried to do a little bit of that with my Monsters of the Week. One of my favorite Monsters of the Week in the books is called the Insta Demon or the Instagram Demon, which was poking fun at the pressures of social media. It's basically a demon that makes you take like selfie after selfie after selfie until it like, takes you over and then your face melts off. One of my Monsters of the Week that got cut from the last book was actually a study demon, which made you overstudy in preparation for a huge test until you became paranoid and started killing everybody around you. It's so easy because some of these pressures that teenagers face or that you faced growing up, it's very easy to turn them into monsters because they feel like monsters. And the show did that just brilliantly. So,
and we love that. What are you working on now?
Right now I'm working on putting the finishing touches on my fantasy novel that comes out in October 29th. It's called Warrior of Legend, and it's the second book in my Champion of Fate Hero Maker series. It's an epic fantasy. I
really hope, Kendare, we get to get you back in the Buffyverse. I hope you get to do something else. I hope you can pitch something to them or we get more. I mean, look, you kind of brilliantly closed the book, but I was like, I want to know what happens in that next phase because you create that moment that we all go through when you're at that age where things are changing and the past is the past, but the future is. I just really hope you get to do that because it would be wonderful to see. I'm down for it.
Thank you. If they ever decide, I would love to see Frankie and the new Scoobies continue in whatever form, whether it's with me or with another writer. I just love those characters and I would love to see them go on.
If I had my druthers, they would use this as the basis for the actual TV show. They would actually take this and use this blueprint because you've given them the world. You've given them the whole next generation of the Buffyverse.
In the books, to do a little bit of a spoiler, to make Spike be suitable to be Frankie's librarian / watcher, Willow casts the glamour on him to make him look age appropriate. And I will admit that entire spell was just based on my secret wish that they could get James Marsters back in as Spike again without having him do heavy makeup or a lot of weird CGI. I'm just like, just glamour him. He still looks great. He's fine. We'll just say that and then we'll play it for laughs. Like, oh my God, I'm so old looking. And they're like, you look great. What is wrong with you?
I love that. Hey, this is Watcher Dev. Thank you for watching this episode. We really appreciate it. We should have some more stuff coming up. Thank you very much, Kendare. I really love doing this. I can't wait to talk to you more.
Thank you so much. This was so much fun.
That was amazing. Yes, I am happy I didn't eat Kendare. So am I.
Me too.
See you soon when we'll do it again. Do it again. Until next time, rewatch, revamp, reinvent, and be remarkable you.